Josh, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Sean. Thank you.
All right, so I covered this a couple weeks ago, and then I see this op-ed from you in Newsweek. And I explained it to the panel at the time. I'm flipping around in the morning. I'm watching the morning news, and there's this segment on NBC4 here in Washington with talking about these restaurant owners that were freaked out because, quote, immigrants, that was the word they used, are very concerned about these ICE raids into the thing. And I said at the panel, like this is like a week ago, I said, it's interesting how immigrants are worried. And I was like, because that's a pretty broad term, right? It's like when everyone says people are small businesses are freaking out. It's like, no, certain ones maybe, but like the folks in the media love to use these terms because I'm like, a lot of people in America, most people in America are somewhat at some level an immigrant. They're not worried. What the guy from the restaurant was really saying is, I'm worried because I'm employing illegals and I don't want to get caught, right? And then I saw this op-ed that you put out, which was interesting because you had a different take on this. And I sort of hadn't connected all of the dots, but I'll read it to folks. It said earlier this week when you wrote the op-ed, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents raided at least 9 restaurants in the nation's capital, requesting proof that the establishments are not flouting the law by employing illegal aliens. Washington, D.C. presents itself as a so-called sanctuary city for illegal aliens, so the mere fact ICE agents targeted a few businesses is hardly surprising. Okay, but then this is where it gets interesting. You said what is perhaps more newsworthy is the specific names associated with those raided restaurants. One of those restaurants, Chef Jeff's, is owned by Jeff Tracy, the husband of CBS News anchor and former vice presidential debate co-moderator Norah O'Donnell. Another of the raided restaurants is owned by former Biden White House chief of staff Jeff Zients. That's the one called Call My Mother, or It's a Bagel Shop, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And a third is owned by left-wing activist Spanish restaurateur Jose Andres. Okay, so at least 3 of the 9. And I will tell you, the one guy in the news clips is a guy who owns apparently the restaurant called Millie's. I don't know anything about them or their ownership, but the way he was describing the raids makes me feel like he's probably pretty far on the left because, again, he was worried about immigrants getting arrested as opposed to people here illegally. But here's the thing that's interesting. Number one, do you think that because those restaurants were rolled up, that they were just popular or that they were targeted because of their connections to folks on the left?
Well, the short answer is that I don't know. And I guess I don't know for multiple reasons. One is because, as you read in my column from a couple weeks ago, Washington, D.C. is a sanctuary city. And what that means is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit potentially when it comes to trying to send in federal ICE agents. And to be clear, Sean, the media likes to use this colorful language of, oh, there's an ICE raid, kind of conjuring up this image in your mind of like a SWAT team with all the helmets and the flashlights and the guns there. They're essentially just showing up to say, let me see your papers to make sure that everyone here is employed illegally. It's a very kind of polite, actually, way to...
Yeah, by the way, it's funny you bring that up because that's literally, and then from what I understand, even by the left-leaning news here, you get like 3 days to bring it to them. So it's not even like they're like walking and show us your papers and you've got to have your license or like they give you time.
Right. Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, like people think that it's like that, they get up like FBI freeze, like they knock in the front door. I mean, that is not what is going on here. Okay,
although it should be.
Look, I mean, if they have probable cause and like they actually think that there is a group of Trendiaragua MS-13 about to commit an imminent felony, then yeah, of course, that's exactly what should happen there. But I have no reason for thinking that is what happened to Jose Andres or this Biden chief of staff bagel shop or anything like that there. I mean, they're basically just showing up and saying, let me make sure that you're not employing any aliens. But I think your point, Sean, is actually a very sound one, which is, if you are a legal immigrant, if you are a legal alien here, and you are not engaged in any kind of criminal activity, if you are not engaged in any kind of subversive activity against the country that has let you in, like someone like a Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia University was, if you have done nothing wrong, you have absolutely nothing whatsoever to fear here. To kind of make a very crude analogy here, again, if you're a legal alien who's a good law-abiding person here, who's on your visa, you have nothing to fear. If you're an illegal alien, you broke the law, you really ought to fear. By way of crude analogy, let's consider someone who is carrying a handgun and is forced to use that weapon. Okay, if you are using that weapon because you are in an active shooter, God forbid, situation where you have someone there who's goes into the restaurant and is taking people hostage there, and you're taking out your gun in self-defense there, you have nothing to fear. If, on the other hand, you take out your gun and you start shooting people for no reason, yeah, you really ought to have a lot to fear. But the context matters. Why you are using the gun matters. Similarly, why you are an immigrant here, how you're an immigrant here, that really makes all the difference in the story there. So I don't know exactly why these specific restaurants were targeted there. I frankly, Sean, and this is kind of the point that I was making in the column, I frankly actually don't really care, to be honest with you, because I think that it is really rich to ask a lot of people to care because a few liberals might have had some immigration officers ask for paperwork, in the context of the past few years of unprecedented republic destabilizing, constitution undermining lawfare against the president of the United States, Donald Trump. I mean, Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro going to jail, the J6ers solitary confinement, pro-life grandmothers being prosecuted under the FACE Act. I mean, I could go on and on and on here, but I'm sorry. I mean, I am not going to pretend to just be, to clutch my pearls and to pretend like the world is coming to an end because a few immigration officers showed up to ask Jose Andres to make sure that he's not employing any illegals in the kitchen there. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to care about that.
Right. And it's funny because I was looking up some of the local stories that aired. It said some restaurants received paperwork giving advance notice of the inspection. I'm like, dude, like they write in one of the stories, as is normal. I'm like, so you're basically getting told, hey, there's people that are going to come inspect your books or find out if you're people. And normally we're giving you a heads up. I'm like, I actually think that's not how they keep saying that's how it normally works. And I'm like, well, that's part of the problem. You're not going to find out any crime if you call the criminals ahead and say, we're coming. Right. So I thought that to me was so funny about this whole story is that the media is like, any other story, the media would have reported that as like an insane thing, right?
Right.
They're like sympathetic. Like the one thing about these ICE raids is that many of the restaurants didn't get a heads up. And I'm like, so that you tell the people not to show up? I mean, what? Like that to me would be the problem. And I can't believe that this is how law enforcement used to work under the last administration. We call you, we tell you we're sending law enforcement to the crime scene. So make sure no one's there when we come.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me a little bit in kind of a roundabout manner of the whole Barack Obama, Syria, Bashar al-Assad red line debates. Because what happened back then was there was this whole debate as to whether Bashar al-Assad had crossed Barack Obama's red line about using chemical weapons. And there was this whole kind of dog and pony show in the U.S. Congress there. And I remember Obama's Secretary of Defense, I believe it was Chuck Hagel at the time, who testified and said, "Oh, it's going to be a small pinprick strike, just to try to enforce our red line there." Well, don't say that. What are you saying this for? I mean, like they're going to know exactly what's going on. It defeats the entire purpose of this exercise here. So yeah, I mean, I saw that same thing, Sean, and I just thought, like, what is happening here? This makes no sense.
All right, so I want to get to the crux of the op-ed though, because I don't want to get off topic too far. It says, I mean, you're basically saying, okay, well, what if these people were targeted? What if Jose Andres or Jeff Zients were targeted? And this is the line that stood out to me in your op-ed. You said, I'll go further. It would be a good thing if the Trump administration sent a message by targeting these 3 Washingtonian restaurants. Why?
So I've been saying this for years, actually. In my estimation here, the left have been the aggressors in the politicized law enforcement wars. Frankly, if you don't agree with that, then I don't even know what to tell you. I mean, in the aftermath of the Donald Trump prosecutions, I mean, but in the column, Sean, I actually go back even further than the Biden administration. I like to start with the Obama administration. It was the Obama administration, especially working with then Attorney General Eric Holder. They were the ones who under the IRS directorship of Lois Lerner first started targeting Tea Party groups to try to strip them of their tax-exempt status. Lois Lerner publicly admitted to doing that. She was thoroughly discredited because of that. Back then it was actually the Little Sisters of the Poor. It was the Catholic nuns out in Colorado who had to sue the Obama administration just to not violate their Catholic faith and to subsidize abortifacients there. So the Obama administration before it, and really the Biden administration taking it to a whole nother level, have been the aggressors here in our ever-escalating politicized law enforcement wars. Now, I'm a lawyer. I'm a constitutionalist. I clerk for a federal appeals court. I revere our rule of law. I revere, our constitutional order. The key question then, Sean, is when you're facing a foe, a revanchist, voracious, insatiable foe, the likes of which is the post-Barack Obama, Biden, Kamala Harris era left, when it comes to sicking the tools of the prosecutorial law enforcement apparatus on the political foes, how do we ultimately unwind this damage and restore us to a status quo ante? And my remedy for that is actually kind of paradoxical or ironic, which is it's actually going to take short-term escalation, because I think we have to get to a place of mutually assured destruction. Mutually assured destruction essentially saved the world of nuclear holocaust during the Cold War era, and I think it is the right paradigm through which to view our current relations between left and right when it comes to prosecutors, DAs, and U.S. attorneys and so forth there. What that means, though, is that in the short term, the right is going to have to get its hands a little dirty. So, for instance, I've called for the Trump DOJ to consider things such as bringing new charges potentially against Hunter Biden. Anthony Fauci got this preemptive pardon on the way out the door, literally in the literal final minutes of the Biden presidency. Before that happened, I think that would have been fair game too. The point is that you're going to have to get things a little worse in order to send a message to the other side to get them to basically back off. I want a non-politicized law enforcement. We should all want that. That is kind of the quintessence of the rule of law and what it means to have a rule of law in the first place there. But unfortunately, I have to deal with reality, and where we're at right now is a deeply, deeply off-bounds, off-kilter, off-pendulum status quo, and I'm just trying to think of creative outside-the-box ways to fix that. I'm not going to pretend that ICE agents showing up to knock on Jose Andres' restaurant is going to fix it. It's not a panacea, but I would like to think that is one data point in a broader attempt to try to rebalance our highly off-balance rule of law.
Okay, so I'm with you on this, because I think the conservative movement in the past, pre-Trump, would largely say, we don't do that.
Exactly.
We're better. We don't do this. And then the left would get back into power, smack us around again, and we'd say, we don't do that. So I'm with you. I guess the question is, like, are you that confident that somehow at some point, because I just don't think, the problem is I don't think a truce can ever be called. Right? I mean, these guys started with the filibuster. You remember back in the day, yep. Harry Reid and others, and then they get mad. And frankly, go back to that. I mean, they threw down then Judge Bork for the Supreme Court. They change the rules. They do things. They color outside the lines. Then we go, gosh, we've got to pledge that we don't do that. Then they go further. And then finally, I think we've learned under Donald Trump to fight and fight back. The question I do wonder, and I know you're posing this, is that, is it just that we hope that we get to a point of mutually assured destruction, or does each side just keep ramping it up?
Well, you're totally right to talk about Judge Bork, by the way. I mean, the modern judicial nominations wars, because our SCOTUS nominees really are judicial nominees in general, and not just SCOTUS. I mean, I think back to Miguel Estrada during the Bush administration. I mean, all sorts of judicial nominees. These are some of the bloodiest battles in Washington these days. And I'm sorry, but both sides are not equally culpable when it comes to the current state of the judicial nominations fight. You are 1,000% correct to start it with Judge Bob Bork. Bork was Reagan's nominee for the court in 1987. You can literally go back 1 year prior to 86. That's when Antonin Scalia had his Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing. Scalia passed the U.S. Senate, if memory serves, by a count of 97-0. I literally think he had no votes affirmatively against him. Then Bork the next year happens, and the rest essentially is history. Clarence Thomas has the so-called high-tech lynching with Anita Hill there in the early 1990s. People forget Sam Alito's own SCOTUS confirmation. It was actually so terrible that his poor wife, Martha Ann, sitting there on C-SPAN just behind then Judge, soon-to-be Justice Alito, was brought to tears because of the questions that these Democrat senators were asking there. And then Brett Kavanaugh 2018. Oh my goodness. I mean, yeah. So I'm sorry, but both sides are not equal when it comes to that. So you're asking a very, very, very fair question. And I do not know the answer to this question, but it is the highest probability of success that I can possibly think of. What I know has not worked. Here's what I know for sure has not worked. What I know that has not worked is exactly what you're describing. This kind of old school kind of country club mentality. In the past, Sean, I've referred to this mentality as principled loserdom, because it likes to think of itself as principled, as taking a kind of faux moral high road, a faux moral high ground there. Oh, we're not going to get our hands dirty. We can go home and go to sleep. And yeah, maybe we lost today's battle. But we can kind of rest on our laurels and just be happy that we played the game according to the rules, and that it's fair and so forth and so forth. But The problem is that we're not dealing with a political opposition that wants to have kind of a civil suit and tie think tank debate over what the proper child tax credit or capital gains tax rate should be. At this point, we're talking about people that want to put us in jail. I mean, that's literally what they've done to people like Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro here. So we're facing a very, very, very different kind of foe, and new tactics, for better or for worse, really are called for at this point.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.